She walked out without a word. 2 bags, a cold stare, and silence. Behind her, 2 newborns crying for a mother who'd never return. One moment he was a husband, a father. The next, just a man holding 2 tiny lives and a heart full of questions. 13 years later she'd come back, but by then, everything had changed. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Why did she leave? Was it greed, shame, fear, or something darker? And how did the man she abandoned rise from nothing to everything? This is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about what happens when pain becomes power. It's about the choices we make when the world strips everything away and leaves us standing alone in the wreckage of what we thought our lives would be. Peter and Linda were young when they fell in love. A small-town romance that everyone envied. The kind of love that made neighbors smile when they walked past holding hands on Sunday mornings. Peter worked the factory floor, reliable, steady, proud of every paycheck he brought home. Linda was the dreamer. Charming, ambitious, always reaching for more than what their small town could offer. Together they built a life, modest but full of laughter and hope. They painted walls together, argued about furniture placement, made plans for a future that seemed certain and bright, until the day the factory closed. The announcement came on a Tuesday afternoon. 200 jobs gone in an instant. Peter stood in the parking lot with men he'd worked alongside for years, watching security guards lock the gates for the final time. The unemployment checks barely covered rent. Peter took whatever work he could find, washing dishes at diners, loading trucks before dawn, painting houses on weekends. He never complained, never showed Linda the exhaustion that made his bones ache. But she saw it anyway. Saw the way his shoulders slumped when he came home. Saw the bills stacking up on the kitchen counter. And when she got pregnant, when the doctor told them it was twins, her face didn't light up with joy. Peter watched her expression change from shock to something he couldn't quite name. Something that looked like fear mixed with resentment. "They're your kids," she said. One night during an argument he'd tried to avoid. "You figure it out." The words hung in the air between them like smoke that wouldn't clear. Peter did figure it out, but not in the way she imagined, not in the way anyone could have imagined. The pregnancy was difficult. Linda spent most days in bed, scrolling through her phone, looking at lives that seemed more exciting than hers. Peter worked 3 jobs to prepare for the babies. He built cribs from secondhand wood, washed tiny clothes in the sink, read parenting books during his lunch breaks. When the twins finally arrived on a freezing February morning, Peter held them in the hospital and felt something shift inside his chest. Mary and Naomi. 2 perfect little faces looking up at him with eyes that hadn't yet learned what the world could do to people. Linda held them too, smiled for the photographs, but Peter could see the distance in her eyes. She was already somewhere else. Already planning an exit he refused to see coming. 3 months passed. 3 months of sleepless nights and endless crying, and Linda growing more distant with each passing day. One cold morning in May, Peter was outside, hanging clothes to dry. The wind was sharp, carrying the last bite of winter. He could hear the twins crying inside, that particular pitch that meant they needed feeding. He hurried with the last of the laundry, fingers numb from the cold. When he came back inside, the house felt different, quieter in a way that made his heart speed up. The crying had stopped, but not in the peaceful way that meant they'd fallen asleep. "Linda," he called out. No answer. He walked through the small house, the twins still in their cribs, faces red from crying. Linda's closet door stood open. Half her clothes were gone, drawers pulled out. Contents scattered like she'd grabbed whatever she could reach first. her makeup bag missing from the bathroom, the suitcase they'd used for their honeymoon gone. Peter ran outside, still holding Mary against his chest, scanning the street for any sign of her. Neighbors were already watching from windows, curtains pulled back just enough to see the chaos unfolding. Mrs. Patterson from next door came out onto her porch, arms crossed, that look on her face that Peter would come to recognize over the years. Pity mixed with judgment. She didn't leave a note. No explanation written on paper, no message on the answering machine. Just vanished like the years they shared meant nothing at all. Peter sat in the dark that night after finally getting both babies to sleep, exhausted in a way that went beyond physical tiredness. He looked at their tiny faces in the dim light coming through the window and made them a promise. "I'll never let you go hungry. I'll never walk away. Whatever it takes, I'll be here." He had no idea then what keeping that promise would cost him, or what it would ultimately give back. The first weeks were a fog of survival. Peter learned to feed 2 babies at once, bottles propped at precise angles while he held them both. Learned to function on 2 hours of sleep, to change diapers with one hand while stirring formula with the other. The neighbors whispered. Some brought casseroles and offered sympathetic smiles. Others crossed the street to avoid him, as if abandonment was contagious. Friends he'd known for years stopped calling. The invitations to barbecues and game nights dried up. Single fathers with infant twins didn't fit neatly into the social fabric of their small town. Peter's savings evaporated within a month. The unemployment checks weren't enough. He started bringing the twins with him to job interviews. Mary and Naomi strapped to his chest in a homemade carrier he'd fashioned from old bed sheets. Most places took one look and told him they'd call back. They never did. He took work cleaning office buildings at night. The twins sleeping in car seats while he vacuumed and emptied trash cans. During the day, he'd pick up whatever odd jobs he could find. Mowing lawns, fixing fences, anything that paid cash and didn't ask too many questions. The owner of the corner store, Mr. Chen, let him buy groceries on credit, keeping a careful ledger in his neat handwriting. Peter paid back every penny when he could, even if it meant eating less himself. The twins grew despite everything. Mary was quiet, observant, her eyes following Peter everywhere he moved. Naomi was louder, demanding, letting everyone know when she wasn't happy. Peter learned their different cries, their rhythms, the way Mary would settle if he hummed low in his chest, while Naomi needed motion, needed to be walked and bounced until she finally gave in to sleep. 6 months after Linda left, Peter was at the hardware store buying supplies for a repair job when a man approached him. Tall, graying at the temples, expensive watch catching the fluorescent lights. "You're Peter Mitchell," the man said. It wasn't a question. Peter nodded, wary of strangers who knew his name. "I heard about your situation," the man continued. "I run a logistics company across town. We're expanding. Need people who understand hard work. Come see me tomorrow. We're hiring." He handed Peter a business card. Robert Chen, it read. CEO, Midwest Freight Solutions. Peter stared at the card long after the man walked away. Tomorrow meant finding someone to watch the twins. Tomorrow meant taking a chance on something that felt too good to be real. But what choice did he have? He showed up the next morning with Mary and Naomi in their stroller, expecting to be turned away at the door. Instead, Robert Chen smiled and led them inside. The warehouse job was exactly as grueling as Robert had warned. Long hours sorting packages, loading trucks, managing inventory in a cavernous space that echoed with the sound of forklifts and shouting voices. But Robert had arranged for a daycare on site. A small room with colorful walls where workers could leave their children during shifts. Peter dropped the twins off each morning, his heart clenching every time they cried as he walked away, but knowing this was the only option that made any sense. He worked harder than anyone else on the floor, stayed late, arrived early, volunteered for the shifts nobody wanted. But he wasn't just working. He was watching, learning, asking questions. How did the routing system work? Why did some shipments move faster than others? What made the difference between profit and loss in an industry he'd never considered before? Robert noticed, started pulling Peter aside, explaining the business side of operations, lending him books on logistics and supply chain management. Peter studied those books after the twins went to sleep, teaching himself concepts that felt foreign at first but gradually began to make sense. Within 6 months, he wasn't just loading trucks. He was suggesting route optimizations, finding inefficiencies in the scheduling system, pointing out ways to cut costs without sacrificing service. Robert promoted him to supervisor, then to manager. Peter's salary doubled, then tripled. He moved the twins out of the cramped apartment into a small house with a yard. Nothing fancy, but theirs. The walls didn't have cracks. The heat worked. There was space for the girls to play without bumping into furniture at every turn. Mary and Naomi were walking now, talking in their twin language that only they understood. Peter would sit on the floor with them for hours after work, building towers from blocks, reading stories with different voices for each character, being present in a way that felt like the only thing that mattered. When the twins were 3, Robert made Peter an offer. "Partner with me," he said. "Help me expand into new markets. I'll give you equity, real ownership, not just a salary." Peter was terrified. Partnership meant risk, meant potentially losing the stability he'd fought so hard to build. But it also meant opportunity, meant building something that could give his daughters a future beyond what he'd imagined. He said yes. The next 5 years were a blur of calculated risks and long nights and expansion into cities they'd never seen. Peter's share of the company grew. The modest house became a comfortable one. The used car became reliable transportation. But Peter never forgot the darkness of those early days. Never let success erase the memory of what rock bottom felt like. He taught Mary and Naomi about money, about work, about the difference between what you need and what you want. They grew up watching him build something from nothing, learning that success wasn't magic or luck, but the result of showing up every single day and refusing to quit. The twins were curious about everything. Mary loved taking things apart to understand how they worked, scattering mechanical pieces across the living room floor. Naomi devoured books, reading at a level years beyond her age, asking questions that forced Peter to admit when he didn't know the answer. They asked about their mother exactly once. Peter was tucking them in, Mary's small voice cutting through the darkness. "Where's our mom?" Peter sat on the edge of the bed, choosing his words carefully. "She left when you were babies," he said. "Sometimes people aren't ready to be parents. But I'm here. And I'm not going anywhere." "Is it because of us?" Naomi asked. "Did we do something wrong?" Peter pulled them both close, feeling tears burn behind his eyes. "No," he said firmly. "You did nothing wrong. You are the best thing that ever happened to me." They didn't ask again. Peter was grateful for that, but also heartbroken that they'd learned so young not to expect answers about the woman who'd carried them for 9 months and then walked away. By the time the twins turned 10, Peter had become a name in the logistics industry. He spoke at conferences, wrote articles for trade publications, consulted for companies trying to modernize their operations. The business he'd built with Robert had expanded to 12 states, employed hundreds of people, generated revenue that would have seemed impossible during those nights cleaning office buildings with 2 babies sleeping nearby. But success hadn't changed the fundamentals of Peter's life. He still woke up early to make breakfast for his daughters, Still helped with homework every night, struggling through algebra problems he'd forgotten and history lessons he was relearning alongside them. Still showed up to every school event, every parent-teacher conference. The only father in a sea of mothers who'd given him suspicious looks at first, but eventually accepted him as part of the community. Mary and Naomi were excelling. Mary had discovered a talent for computers, teaching herself to code from library books and online tutorials. Naomi was writing stories, filling notebooks with elaborate plots and complex characters that surprised her teachers. When they turned 16, the twins came to Peter with an idea. They wanted to build an app, something to help small businesses manage logistics more efficiently. Peter listened to their pitch, impressed by the research they'd done, the problem they'd identified, the solution they proposed. "I'll fund it," he said, "but you're doing the work. No special treatment, because you're my daughters. This is real business. Sink or swim." They sank. The first app was clunky, poorly designed, solving a problem nobody actually had. The twins were devastated. Peter took them out for ice cream, let them process the disappointment, then asked the question that would shape their next attempt. "What did you learn?" They tried again, and again. The third attempt was different. They'd spent months talking to actual business owners, understanding real pain points, building something that addressed genuine needs. The app launched when they were 19. Within 6 months, they had 10,000 users. Within a year, investors were calling. The twins were featured in business magazines, interviewed on podcasts, held up as examples of young entrepreneurs who'd identified a gap in the market and filled it. Peter watched from the sidelines, proud in a way that made his chest ache. These brilliant, driven, compassionate young women had grown up without a mother, raised by a father who'd been figuring it out as he went along, and somehow they'd turned out better than he could have hoped. They credited him constantly in interviews, talked about the work ethic he'd modeled, the resilience he'd taught them. But Peter knew the truth. They'd saved him as much as he'd saved them, given him purpose when everything else had fallen apart, made him into someone he'd never imagined becoming. By the time Mary and Naomi turned 20, their company had been acquired by a major tech firm. The terms were generous enough to set them up for life. They could have retired, traveled, done nothing. Instead, they started planning their next venture, their minds already racing toward the next problem to solve. Peter was in his office on a Tuesday afternoon when his assistant buzzed through. "There's someone here to see you," she said, her voice carrying a strange tone. "She says she's family." Peter's stomach dropped before his mind could catch up. He hadn't heard that word applied to anyone outside his daughters in over 13 years. "Send her in," he said, standing up behind his desk like he was preparing for a business negotiation rather than whatever this was about to be. Linda walked through the door, and Peter barely recognized her. Time had etched lines around her eyes, added gray to her hair that she'd tried to cover with dye that didn't quite match. She wore expensive clothes, but they hung on her frame like they belonged to someone else. She'd lost weight in a way that didn't look healthy. Her hands shook slightly as she clutched her purse. "Hello, Peter," she said, her voice smaller than he remembered. "Can we talk?" Peter gestured to the chair across from his desk, maintaining the distance of furniture between them. Linda sat, looking around the office with an expression Peter couldn't quite read. "You've done well," she said. "I saw the articles, read about the company, about the girls." "Our girls," she corrected, and Peter felt something cold settle in his chest. "My daughters," he said quietly. "You left. You chose to walk away." Linda's eyes filled with tears. "I was young," she said. "Scared. I didn't know how to be a mother. I thought they'd be better off without me." Peter leaned back in his chair. For 13 years, he'd imagined this conversation. Imagined yelling, demanding answers, making her feel a fraction of the pain she'd caused. But now that she was here, sitting across from him with tears running down her face, he felt nothing but a deep, settled calm. "You were wrong," he said. "They needed their mother. But they survived without her. We all did." Linda pulled papers from her purse. "I've been sober for 2 years," she said. "Been in therapy, trying to fix all the things I broke. I want to make amends. Want to know them. If you'll let me." Peter studied the woman across from him, trying to reconcile her with the young wife he'd loved, the mother who'd abandoned their children. 2 years, he said. That's good, genuinely. But Mary and Naomi are adults now. This isn't my decision to make. If they want to know you, that's their choice. I won't stand in the way. But I won't push them toward you either. They've built lives without you. Good lives. Beautiful lives. You don't get to walk back in and claim credit for that." Linda nodded, tears still flowing. "I know," she whispered. "I just want the chance to tell them I'm sorry, to let them know I think about them every day. That leaving was the biggest mistake I ever made." Peter called Mary and Naomi that evening, explained the situation, gave them the choice he'd promised. They were quiet for a long time. "We'll meet her," Mary finally said, "but on our terms, in public, and you're coming with us." The meeting happened on a Saturday afternoon in a coffee shop downtown. Peter sat between his daughters watching Linda approach their table. She looked terrified, her hands shaking as she pulled out a chair. Mary and Naomi stared at her with identical expressions, curious but guarded. "Thank you for seeing me," Linda said. "I know I don't deserve this." Mary spoke first. "Why did you leave?" Linda took a breath. "I was depressed, overwhelmed. I convinced myself you'd all be better off without me. It was selfish and wrong, and I've regretted it every day since." Naomi leaned forward. "We're not interested in rebuilding what never existed," she said. "We had a parent. We had Dad. He was enough. But we appreciate you coming. We appreciate the apology. Maybe someday we can have coffee again. Talk. Get to know each other as adults. But that's all we can offer right now." Linda nodded, crying openly now. "That's more than I deserve," she said. "Thank you." They talked for another hour, careful conversation that skirted around the deep wounds that hadn't fully healed. When it was over, Peter walked his daughters to their car. "You did good," he told them. "You handled that with grace." They both hugged him tight. "We learned from the best," Mary said. "Sometimes the people who walk out on you aren't meant to stay. Sometimes the pain they cause becomes the fire that shapes your destiny." Peter never chased revenge. He chased purpose, and he gave his daughters everything except the bitterness their mother left behind. If this story moved you, tell us. Do you believe people can truly change? Drop your thoughts in the comments. And if you thought this story was powerful, wait until you hear what happened in the next one, where betrayal led to something even greater. Subscribe and stay inspired.